you would do me the favor of just reminding people who you are, where you're from, and kind of a little bit about how you got interested in ultras. I will say, just for people, if this is the first time that you're hearing Sarah on the podcast, she's also back in episode 91 and 124. So she is a frequent flyer on the podcast. You're probably rivaling Frank for the most podcast appearances, which I know is a little bit of a ding for him. Like he really, he really has it out. Really wants to be the most featured guest on the podcast. So, but people should definitely go back and listen to
I think he's in
91
his
and one.
feelings about
Yeah.
this episode, but I reassured him if we remember to do some voice memos at Southern States, he'll be able to be on the podcast again. So that's good.
100%. That we are going to get a lot of good content out of
Oh, get
Southern
ready,
States.
everybody.
So remind people who you are, where you're from, and just like a little bit of your backstory. Like, how did you get interested in running? Has your been, your progression? And people can go back and listen to like the in-depth stories in those other two episodes.
Yeah, you bet. So my name is Sarah Brandt. I live in Salem, Massachusetts, the witch city. I, like a lot of people, I was a road runner for a really long time and had some fun. That was great. I had some wonderful experiences as a road runner and then had a bunch of injuries and just life changes and things, and just kind of landed into trail running because I was rehabbing an injury that was really long standing and needed to be off of the roads for some time. So I started trail running and thought, well, this is pretty nice. I'm out in nature and really enjoy that. And at the same time, my husband, who is also a runner, was interested in doing an ultra. And I was like, what's that? And then he told me, and I was like, that's crazy. But he did do a few ultras, and I really became interested in doing one myself when I was there to crew for him, because I just thought it was a great environment. And I really thought that the people were sort of, I jived with the people and the vibe at the ultra. Ended up doing Run Your First 50K program in
A long
early
time ago.
2022, I think it
Yeah.
was. It was the first round, OG,
Yep.
with a great group of women, and went on to do my first ultra and I did look this up, July of 2022. So not that long ago, really, at Notchview. I did a 12-hour race and just head over heels since then, and have done a number of 100-milers and a 48-hour and a few 50Ks. And next progression just seemed like, all right, let's check out this 200 thing and see what this is all about. So that's going to be Southern States 200, which is coming up in about, let's see, what's today, the 25th. So we've got about little over 3 weeks.
Yeah,
And
as
we'll
we
be
sit here
towing the
today,
line.
it's Tuesday, February 25th. People probably won't hear this for a couple weeks, but yeah, you're a few weeks out, which is why I wanted to sort of get you on here so we can do a pre and a post,
Yes.
pre thoughts and then post thoughts. So you've done pretty much every distance on some level, spanning from 50K, an accidental like 50-miler. People can go back and like listen to that. You've done Ghost Train a couple times. So was there like an actual point where you were like 200, that's it? Or did it kind of just like permeate your brain and like eventually work its way in? Or was there like a very specific thought, I must do 200 miles?
I think the thing that first attracted me to the 200s was that some of them are in absolutely jaw-dropping locations. Um, I started watching a bunch of documentaries about Moab and Tahoe and Cocodona, and I was just, that desert running to me is such an attractive idea. And the idea of just going out and spending 3, 4, 5 days out in that environment is like, yes, just give me that. Now here I am about to go to do a race, not in a desert environment at all, but that was kind of what piqued the interest. And doing some of those races is definitely still on the bucket list. Just with life and timing and a number of factors, Southern States just fit in better right now. And so that's why that one made it to the top of the list.
Am I making this up, or did I recall a conversation between you and me where you were like, think I should just go for the Arizona Monster, like 300?
Oh, 100% I did. Yeah. I think I said that, and I was like pretending to be joking, but I think if anybody had been on board with me, I for sure would have signed up. That is in April, right? This year. So last year was the first time for Southern States, 2024.
Hmm.
So that was in April of 2024. And this year they're running it in March of 2025. So it's a month earlier. But the timeline would have, at the time that last year when we were considering it, it was running in the same month. And I was like, well, we could do Southern States or we could just like do the Arizona Monster 300. Like, what's another extra 100 miles? You and Frank were both like, that's like triple the like, I'm not saying no, but maybe slow your roll a little.
Let's just rein it in a little bit here.
Yeah, yeah. So I have a thing or two, and I at the time 100 was my longest, and I hadn't done anything more than one overnight. Okay, there's a few missing pieces we can fill in this puzzle before we jump to the Arizona Monster. It's going to happen. You better believe it's going to happen, and whatever other insanity they come up with by the time we get to it. But yeah.
So why did you pick Southern states as opposed to, some of the others? Was it just timing? Because you mentioned how much you really kind of gravitate towards the desert because you have kind of lived there, right? Like you lived in the desert for a while. So was it just the timing? Was it the course? What was it? Because I think like this is, I think it's kind of feeds back into the conversation about how we all choose our races. Like sometimes it just happens to work out from a timing perspective. Sometimes it is the location. Sometimes, there's a lottery. And so that like ups the ante. That's not the case for Southern states and it's open registration. So I'm just curious as to like what were some of the factors that went into that decision picking that race?
Yeah, a number of things. I think that the fact that you can just sign up whenever you want and there's no lottery and it's tiny and it doesn't fill is a benefit to somebody who's just starting out. And for me, it just felt very accessible. I think that because it's a new distance, granted, it starts in the mountains in northern Georgia, and it's a point-to-point 200 on the Pinhoti Trail to the highest point in Alabama. But overall, the elevation is not as significant as any of the races out west, and the terrain is not wildly different from what I experience here in New England. So there are a number of things. It's a brand new distance for me, but I have taken out the factor of the dry desert heat. I've taken out the factor of super, super significant elevation. It definitely has a bunch of climbing, but it's just not as much. So just kind of like, what are the things that that will be new are fewer as I do Southern states versus if I go and do Moab, that's 2.5 times as long. That's desert, that's sand, that's open. You're not on a shaded, woodsy trail. So there's just so many different things about some of those races that this one felt like, well, these are things, there's some familiarity here
Hmm.
with the terrain and some of the other factors versus the others. I 100% look forward to doing some of those other races someday. I think for me, Cocodona really is appealing. I love Arizona, and something about that one just really piques my interest. But so maybe that one will be next, and then we can go and do the Arizona Monster and fill a few other ones in there too.
Well, we
Oh,
can go do.
I guess I made an assumption there. I don't think it'll take too much convincing.
We'll have to see how Moab goes because, of the two of us, I know what 200 miles requires. And I'm not
This
saying
is
like,
true.
yeah, it is for sure doable. And I think like one of the aspects about of your story that I really love is that it's a real demonstration of the fact that like you can sign on to this game of running ultras and really have a lot of success with it and almost have sort of carte blanche to be able to do whatever you want, as in terms of distance. Like, you could stop at 50K, you could go to 50 miles, you could do 100K, 100 miles, you could do whatever you want. And I guess like part of this conversation is kind of what Jess Green and I were talking about a couple weeks ago, which is like the 200 distance may sound really intimidating, and it is, right? Like you think, people are always comparing it to like how far they have to drive to work or, to their favorite vacation spot. Like, oh my God, could I ever run that? And the reality of the situation is you're not really running it, right? It's a race, a quote unquote, an event, if we're going to use the word race, it's a race of attrition, really. Like just how long can you keep going? But it's a matter of like all of those factors. I think like, all right, so you talked about why you picked Southern states. So I think the next sort of logical question and like topic for discussion is training, right? Like how you've done 100 miles multiple times. What are you doing differently? What aren't you doing differently? Like talk about like some like the length of your plan, what you've been
Yeah.
incorporating, kind of break it down for people.
So and the runners at Southern State are myself and Frank and my friend Nicole. And then we have a whole crew coming down as well, which we're so appreciative of. And Frank and I had signed up for Southern States about a year out. So he went down last year to volunteer. So he was volunteering at some of the aid stations and scoping out the course and just getting a feel for things, which has been super helpful because he had some insight. There were minor changes to the course, but some insight as to some of the aid stations and the accommodations and things like that. And just a sense of like, is this something we really want to sign on to or not? Because it is very, very small. I think there's about 57 registered runners that last time I checked, and they are running a 100 this year as well. And you said it was what, like 16 or something? That shocks me. I'm surprised there's not more, but
Yeah, I do believe, I
it
think
was
it was like
tiny.
under 25. Yeah.
Yeah, it was tiny. So it's a very, very small race. So we wanted to make sure that it was going to be well supported enough, particularly being a point to point. But having Frank's intel, having been down there, that was super helpful to say, yes, this is good. So it's been on the calendar for about a year, a year out, which gave me time to kind of space out any races or big training weekends that I was doing to support Southern States. So the first thing I did for that was in last July, I did a 48-hour race at Notchview, and Notchview is my first ever ultra. So just my heart for Notchview. I just love it so much. It's a looped race. And by signing up for the 48 hours, my primary goal was to work through 2 nights and kind of see how that felt. And number of different factors were thrown at us there this year at July. So it ended up being very, very hot. And there was a lot of humidity. There was a lot of like heat rash and foot stuff. And overall mileage was lower than I had maybe anticipated. I ended up with 110 miles, which is great. Not quite as much as I wanted, but I was satisfied with. But that primary goal of working through 2 nights and knowing what does that feel like, and if I'm this tired and I go to bed and I wake up and I have to keep moving, what does that feel like? And so having done that and come off the back end of that made me feel like, oh wow, I really can keep moving. And it was such a shocking experience because I basically worked through the first night and then laid down for a little while and kind of like toss and turn and just, this isn't working. So I just kept moving and then ended up lying down on the second night and I fell asleep for I was negotiating hard with Frank because Frank was out there crewing me, and Marty and my husband Rick as well. And I had said, he was like, you can sleep for 2 hours. And I was like, how about 3 hours? And he's like, you can sleep for 2 hours and then you have to do another lap. And I was like, how about 3 hours? And then I'd take 2 laps. And so it's a lot of negotiating going on to get myself more sleep, which um, he was agreeable to. But I ended up laying down and I fell asleep for probably an hour and a half. And it was probably 2.5 hours total that I was in the aid station or in my tent, and the guys had all gone off to go to sleep because we had agreed come back at this time. So, but I just woke up, so I was there kind of by myself, and I was like, well, I can't fall back asleep. Guess I'll just go run some more. So I kind of by myself got ready and went out because we had agreed on the time to be later. They needed rest as well. And granted, get that first few minutes of getting up and getting moving, I was, oh gosh, this is something else. But then once I kind of grease the system a little bit, had some Coke and mashed potatoes. I was like, all right, let's do this. And I couldn't believe how good I felt once I got things moving. And I ended up doing 5 laps. So I felt very happy about that. Um, so that was a really good experience to prep me for Southern States, to know what it feels like to not really want to, not really feel like super fresh, but like, all right, you got to get up and keep moving and, um, work through different types of challenges than I'd had really at Ghost Train. Ghost Train's October, so you never quite know what you're going to get with the weather. I never have had wild, wild heat at that race. I know a few years it has been, never when I was there, but I definitely got that at Notch View this year, which is, what do you do in that moment? If it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and it's 85 and it's 90% humidity, like maybe taking a break in the middle of the day is the best bet. And then you can get out, get that rest, and go back out at night. So kind of facing those decisions at Notch View was a good way to sort of prime myself for the kinds of decisions we'll have to make at Southern States. But then back to training, I did do Ghost Train again this year in October, and that was wonderful as always. Ghost Train's always such a well hosted race. It's a great vibe, good spirits. Everybody's happy. It's just a really, really fun environment to be in. And that was a sort of opposite experience of Notch View in that it got very, very cold overnight and had to deal with the cold. And probably the closest I've ever come, not probably, definitely the closest I've ever come to tagging out earlier than I intended. It was about 75 miles and I was so freezing. Temperature wise, it wasn't that cold. It just dropped so quickly and people weren't quite ready for it. And it was probably in the mid to high 30s, which if you put that out today, we'd probably be thrilled. But, this was October, we were on the other end of it. But I laid down in my tent at 75 miles and thought, I just don't know if it's in the cards. I don't know if it's safe for me. I was so cold to the bone and I really had to stop and take a significant amount of time to warm up and lay in my sleeping bag and drink broth and really get my body warm to make sure it was safe enough for me to go back out. And I did go back out and sludge through the last 25 miles, but it was not the performance I wanted necessarily, but I was happy to have faced that demon of, gosh, I could just go home. I just go home now, and making that decision of not going home was a good thing, another like coin in the bank for Southern States, because there will be times where I probably will just want to go back to the Airbnb and take a nap, but we will be pushing through. So those were the two big races that I did in prep. And then I've done a couple of 50K distances, including this past weekend. I did a 3 day in a row, 8 hours a day. So that was a really big, strong effort that felt great. And so in terms of lining up races, that's kind of how I've prepped for Southern States. But I think the training itself, the biggest changes have been adjusting to do time rather than mileage. It took a little minute. I'm doing okay. And there are days, especially on the shorter days, when it's like a 1 hour run, and I'm like, but if I just go 4.5 more minutes, it can be an even. So sometimes I tweak it a little, but for the most part, it's been pretty good. And it really has felt nice on the longer stuff. It's like, who cares? I'm going out for however many hours. So that's been a little bit freeing, which is nice. So that's been a big adjustment. And then I think the two things that I kind of have reflected on are the overall amount of time that it requires, especially in the last probably 6 weeks or so, has just felt kind of astronomical. It's a full life commitment for you and all the people you live with. There are times that I look at that training schedule coming up on the weekend and it's like, I don't know when I'm going to do anything else. And so the amount of time really is a big adjustment and quite different. It has been quite different for me as compared to the 100. But then the intensity has been less a little bit. I have very purposefully been incorporating a lot of walk run intervals, which particularly for Notch View and even for Ghost Train, I kind of wanted to do it fast. And that's something I need to let go of a little bit. But I want to do some speed workouts. I want to get all this fast work in. And for Southern States, that's not the goal. And if I don't walk, if I don't prep my walking, train my walking, I'll be paying for it big time. So I've been very good about incorporating walk run intervals in all of my long runs, which, it doesn't take longer, because if you're going out for 6 hours, you're going out for 6 hours no matter what you're doing, which is very freeing. But the intensity overall is less. So I might do 6 or 8 hours, which sounds like a lot, but it doesn't feel like 6 or 8 hours. I'm trying to think, my longest training run for Ghost Train was probably between 25 and 30 miles, but pretty much exclusively running. And I haven't done that for Southern States. It's been much more of a mixed walk run. And so overall, the intensity hasn't been for me, as my body hasn't felt as depleted sometimes after a long run weekend as it has for Ghost Train. It just takes freaking forever because you're just hours and hours. So that's a big difference, I think, that I've.
Thing that I was sort of, taking away from what you were saying is that, you're looking at the big thing, the whole big thing of southern states and starting to like reverse engineer it and break it down based on, okay, what's the task at hand? What are the skills I need? Do I possess said skills? What's going to be a challenge? What's going to be like easy? Like maybe there are some things, like gear or who knows, like there's certain aspects of it that you're like, no problem. But really, my focus needs to be over here on this specific subset because those are the things I'm kind of like, I can do them for 100, but can I do them for 200? That sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds right. I think you make a good point with the gear. One thing I didn't mention was partially because this is a race that I have to travel to, and
Mm-hmm.
partly just because it's a point to point and there's a whole crew. The level of logistics is off the charts compared to what I've done before. And partly is because the races I've done are relatively local, drivable. Notch View is a looped race, so you're not really thinking about aid stations because it's all in one spot. Ghost Train is, an out and back, but you're still set up in one spot. Your crew doesn't have to move. So it's just a different level of preparation and needing to know the course. If you're having 57 people spread out along 200 miles, you need to know where you're going and make sure that, I mean, all the gear has to be, you just have to be ready. If you muck up your gear in the first 50K and you end up with a blister or you end up with whatever, like you're just setting yourself up for a really awful time. So making sure that all those pieces are kind of put in place. And here I am, like it's 3 weeks out, and I'm like, I haven't labeled all my food bags. Like I need to, I'm really starting to get to the point where I need to literally start packing stuff up, because one of our crew members, Marty, is going to be driving down in his van, so he's able to carry some of the things. So I have to make sure that's ready to go ahead of time. And um, it's a huge time commitment with planning out the logistics. And I know there are people who just kind of like throw their stuff in the bag and show up, and I am for sure not that person. There are spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets of prep and planning to do as many things as we can to be ready for whatever the conditions throw at us.
Logistics, you talked about it being a point to point race. Let's dive into just a little bit of like the anatomy of it. Like you're starting in one place, you're finishing in another. How many aid station stops are there along the way? Like, what's the max distance between aid stations? We don't have to get into like hyper specifics, but like, what are, just so that people can sort of wrap their brain around it, especially since it is a point to point race. You're going to be out there, like you said, you're going to have all these people that are spread out over the course, for 200-ish miles.
Yeah. There are 16 aid stations, and then the 17th is when you're at the finish. So you start in northern Georgia and in a town called Dalton, and you run to Mount Cheaha in Alabama. So I think I'm looking here at my little chart. Of course, the max distance between aid stations is about just over 17, and then some of them are 9. Most of them are in like the low, like 11 to 13 or 14 or so. And of course, it's a real mix of what the terrain looks like. That 17-mile section is a road section, so it's and significantly flatter than the rest of the course. So it's longer, but it's, quite different. And there's a mix of, some of those are full aid stations with food and a grill and, hot food served cooked to order. Many of them are sleep stations as well, particularly once you get to like mile 70 and beyond, where they'll have cots set up. If you need to sleep there, you're able to do that. One or two of them, or just one perhaps, is a water only. So it's kind of up in the mountains in the middle of a longer section. They have a water stop that is not manned, so it's just water only. But I've also read that a lot of the course, there's a ton of creeks and streams and things. So water wise, it's pretty accessible.
Hmm.
So I know there are long sections out in Cocodona and Moab and Tahoe where you don't have access to water necessarily, where this, at least last year, was not the case. There was water, quite a bit of water available on this course. So we do have to carry
Hmm.
a water filter. So that will be available if needed. Um, but let's see what else. Yeah, the first 70 miles is pretty standard, southeastern mountainous terrain. It's nothing, you're not climbing to 12,000 feet or anything like that, but we're gonna be, ascending and descending. And then at about mile 70 to mile 100 are quite flat, and a portion of that is on the road. And then from 100 to 200 is similar to that first 70.
Hmm.
So there's a mix of terrain, and I think that road section in the middle will be either I will probably be like, I'll be on the mountains and be like, I can't wait to be on the road. And as soon
Yeah.
as I get on the road, I'm like, oh my God, put me back in the mountains. So um, I've
But
watched a
that's
number of,
good though, like that you've got that variation because as someone who's done a
yeah,
very flat race like Ghost Train and not Notch View is probably like, kind of similar in the sense that there's a little elevation, but not a ton. You're not doing a ton of climbing. That
mhm,
can really wear on you. So that
yeah,
17 miles of road, like you said, might be a nice reprieve. And then to get back into a little bit of climbing is going to give you that opportunity to use those muscles in a different way.
yeah, absolutely. I think we didn't really get there yet, but I think just in general, one of the things that I'm the most nervous about is that I have not had a ton of opportunity to do a lot of climbing. I haven't been in the mountains. I live like 50 yards from the ocean. It's flat here. You can find some hills. I'm not going to call them mountains. You can find some and not like you're at elevation, but like you can find things that go up and things that go down. You have to look for them. From my house, it's pretty flat. And there are times that I will make a decision. If I have a pocket of time, I'm going to drive someplace because I know I want to do a little bit more up and down. I'm going to lose time overall in how long I can be out, but I can gain the up and down. Sometimes I make the other decision, like this is my pocket of time and I just got to go from home. And that's what it is. The I think in general, we've had a very forgiving winter up until like the last maybe 3 to 4 weeks. Through December and January, things were it was chilly. You had to really have your good, strong, warm layers on and all your mittens and gloves and hats and all the things. But our trails were clear. We didn't have any snow. And then we had a few snowstorms, but then things melted and everything. But then we had a few in a row here in February, and then just ice up the wazoo. And so the trails have been fully inaccessible, not even for a second. So I haven't. I did go to a nature spot near me that has some groomed cross country ski trails. So I was able to spend some time there. And that does have a little bit of up and down. So that was great to just be outside. Like groomed cross country trails is also not exactly what we're going to be facing in southern states.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a mix, but Nicole and I we were planning a 6 hour day together outside, and we had to walk the whole thing because it was so icy. It was like there were times where it was like we were penguin walking because it was so icy. It's like this is not really the vision that we had of what the day was going to be, but
Yeah.
we did
You're
get through it.
you're talking about how, you don't have a lot of hills or anything near you, but like you're no stranger to the climbing because, over the last couple of years, you and your sister have been working on the 48s, right? So
Yes,
like
yes,
you're very familiar with hiking and climbing and descending. It just is a little more challenging to work it into this cycle of training when we're talking about, fall into winter into early spring here in the Northeast when it could be a little tricky, like you were mentioning, to get that training in depending on the weather.
yeah. Frank and I keep sending each other memes like of like crying and like who like spring race or like early spring race. Whose freaking idea was this? And we're like, I
Yeah.
guess this was our idea. But
Yeah.
it is nice to know that this big race will be, in the books as of the end of March, and then we can look ahead and, do whatever we want with our summer. But you do make a good point. I should keep that in mind that I'm not a stranger to long days of climbing and descending in the mountains, and particularly in the White Mountains, which are very, very steep and the terrain is very rough. and with a big backpacking pack on and spending lots of time out there. So
Hmm.
that will serve me. It hasn't really been, well, that's a lie. We did do quite a bit over the summer and into the fall. We finished our 48 in September, so we do have some good experience there too that will serve me well for sure at Southern States.
Yeah.
My
So
sister
you
has no interest in doing any of this running business. She's like, absolutely not.
you can't even convince her to crew you on one or pace you on one of the later legs that, is probably going to be 99.9% walking.
If I could promise her that it was walking, which, like, let's be honest, it probably will be, she'd be all over it. Um, Absolutely no interest in the running piece. The logistics piece, if there's a spreadsheet, oh yeah, she's all over that. But
Oh, yes. We
yeah,
have spreadsheets. We have lots and lots of
yes,
spreadsheets.
yes, indeed.
So you alluded to this before, but like, talk a little bit about maybe some of the aspects that maybe you're a little nervous about, some of the unknowns, like, what are your goals for this race in terms of, finishing and timing and we the other night on our coaching call we talked about outcome goals versus process goals. So outcome goals being something like I want to finish in a certain time, or I want to place a certain category or whatever. Process goals being the things that feed into that will eventually get you to those outcome goals. So maybe just talk a little bit about like
Yeah.
what your outcome goals for this race are.
And I mentioned this in our coaching call, but it's tricky for me to land on outcome goals for a distance I've never done. And I've said, I know we're not supposed to say I just want to finish, but I want to finish, and I want to finish feeling not like death. So I don't know if that's outcome oriented enough. Um, I think I can reflect on this when I think about my 3 ghost trains and how they were all very different. And the first one, the first time at this distance, I had lined up pacers for various times, and I ended up running with Nicole for a significant amount of it. And we had so much freaking fun at that ghost train. It was just, there were times that I couldn't walk or run because I was laughing so hard I was like keeled over. We just had a blasty blast. And so I have such good memories of that first ghost train. And then my second ghost train, I ended up with a really good time performance, and I felt really strong about the way I sort of executed the race. And I ended up being solo for a good portion of that race, but I felt really good about my improvement in my time. And it's like all these things I've learned and applied, and now my time kind of came up better. And then the third one, it's like I missed the mark on both. I really wanted to Frank and I had hoped to go over 100 because it's Ghost Train 100, but it's really a 30-hour. So you can hit 100, and if you want to keep going, you can. So he and I had hoped to do that and maybe hit 115 because the out and backs are 15 miles. And we had aimed to stick together, and we had some sort of like goals related to how long we're going to spend in aid stations and when we're going to spend that time. He had some physical stuff that prevented him from going as long as he wanted to. So then I was kind of solo, but then I didn't really like execute on some of the aid stuff. And then it got so cold and I wasn't really with anybody. Rick was able to come out for some of the end. So like I didn't have as much fun, and I didn't do as well on my time. So it was like I missed the boat on both. So I think for Southern States, one
Mhm.
thing I want to keep in mind is like, what's the point if I'm not having a good time? If it means my time is a
Yes.
little bit slower, if it means I, give up, like, oh, if I'm ready to go, but I have to go by myself, versus if I wait an hour, I can go with my people. Wait the hour
Hmm.
and go with your people. It's going to be more fun.
Hmm.
I definitely have a tendency to get over analytical with the numbers and let that suck the fun out of it. And I want to not let that happen at Southern States. I want to have a fun time. And if that means the timing isn't, if I set an outcome goal of 90 hours and I come in at 98 hours, but I had a blast, great. That's fine. Um I have had races where I have cared very much about my finishing time, and this is not that race. I want to have a transformative, fun, wonderful time in the woods and face some demons and eat some snacks and just be in the woods for a couple of days. I want the experience more than the outcome, timing based stuff. I want to do well. I want to finish all of that too, but it feels like a different level of goal setting than I have done before for the Ghost Train or the Notch
Mhm.
View races.
Yeah, and I think that's the tricky part for this type of thing because there are so many unknowns. You know what it's like to run 100 miles, and you can even reflect on maybe your experience at 50-ish miles, right? Like the difference between 50 and 100 is kind of night and day. Like there are lots of lessons that you can learn at those shorter distances that apply to 100 miles, but you're kind of operating on a different level. Same thing is true for the 100 to 200. It's everything that you just mentioned and so much more. And so you can anticipate and plan for and train for a certain subset of those things. But then there is another whole segment or subset that you don't even know that you don't know.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's, I think, what makes um, I think that's what keeps people from attempting this distance because they, like I've talked about before, and like I was victim to, all throughout this process. I think I need to know everything before I sign up and start the thing. But that's not necessarily the case. And there you can draw from previous experiences and talk to other people and listen to podcast episodes and read race reports and all that stuff and kind of start to do some fact finding and figure out, okay, and some self-evaluation, some sort of a SWOT analysis, right? Like we've talked about, to figure out like what are my strengths and can I find a race that aligns with that, right? Like so for you, this race being, I mean, you could probably be very, very successful in a desert race as well because that's an environment that you have lived in and you can, you would I mean, like I'm kind of in the same boat, right? Like we live on the East Coast, but I'm going to do Moab. If you were going to do Arizona, like it would take a little bit of reacclimating to the desert, but you live in the Northeast. The terrain in this particular race is very similar to what we have in the Northeast. You've climbed all these mountains, so you're no stranger to climbing. You've done 100 miles before. So you do bring a lot of strengths to this. And it's just a matter of thinking kind of maybe even outside the box and almost like doom casting and being like, okay, what could potentially go wrong? Right? Like, what are some of the things? That's feet, that's nutrition, that's the sleep deprivation. And how do wrap your brain around those? How do you simulate those? You talked about, going for 48, 72 hours ish at Notchview, like just trying to go through 2 nights and learning some of those lessons. And I think all of that is really going to, pay off in some way, shape, or form over the course of those 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
So, talk a little bit about like your game plan for the race. Like, gun goes off at noon. You mentioned some of the aid stations and the sleep stations. And I mean, spoiler alert, like, we talked about this the other day, like on our team, crew call. And just like I have shared in previous episodes, especially the Tahoe episode, about how I thought things were going to go and then how they actually went. So even though you're going to talk about this, it's almost with like the whole thing has an asterisk next to it, like yes, but also like
Plan, which we know could fully change or will fully change at whatever points. Um, yeah, so it's point to point, and we have an Airbnb just about halfway for everybody to chill out. So there will be myself and Frank and Nicole, and then we have 3 pacers and 1 crew person who is exclusively crew and not pacing. And those people will be keeping us moving and eating and all of these things. So in terms of the course, we have planned on going for the first about 40 miles and then taking a bit of a break to get our legs up and maybe sleep for a little bit. So taking like a 1 to 2 hour break at about 40 miles. And then this is also a noon start. So that plays into quite a bit of how we're thinking of when we would use pacers. Frank's really keen to make sure he has pacers as much as possible at night, particularly if it's the road section. I'm sort of more keen to hold my pacers for the later miles when I think I'm going to be a little bit more of a basket case. We've each kind of communicated that to our team. Like, if there are times when, if it does turn out that we have to separate, this is Frank's priority, this is my priority. And Nicole is in the mix as well. She's not bringing any dedicated pacers, but hopefully she'll be with us as well for as much as possible. The course at mile 70, that's the rolling climbing, but then at 70 it gets pretty flat. And there is a sleep station at mile 70. There's also a really nice sleep station at mile 100. So that feels it would be really nice to make it to 100 before taking the first more significant sleep break. So that's the aim, is to get through that. And I think the one thing that has been so hard for me is to fill out that race estimator and say, what's your pace going to be for these 30 and then these 40 and then these. And I'm like, I don't know. I just don't know. Because so much of the pace is going to be driven by the time of day. It's going to be March, so it could be 45 degrees, which would be great. It could be 80 degrees, which would be less great. One of the reasons they moved it up a month was because of the heat. So we're hoping to avoid much of that. But is it pouring rain? Is it windy? Is it, what's happening? The noon start makes it a little tricky. If you're 12 hours into a race, is that too early to be taking a break? But it's midnight. So there's just some factors that we have to think about in terms of game plan for the time of day. But then after 100 miles, that's when it gets to be back rolling again for the rest of the race. So we have aimed to really take the first break around 40, but just shorter, and then try to get to 100 before a more significant sleep. That may work out to be midday, which it's just going to depend on how quickly we can get through that 100 miles. A midday break can be great if it's very hot. A midday break can be hard because it's difficult to sleep. So those are the things that it's sort of like choose your own adventure. I feel like if it's like a flow chart, if I need the sleep and it's 80 and it's 1 in the afternoon, I'll take the sleep. That's when I'll take it. If I'm feeling good and it's 50, so there's a little bit of like, if A then B, that's hard for me to swallow with the race estimator because I just don't know what I don't know. But then, as I mentioned, I'm looking to hold some of my pacers until that last 100, when we'll be getting into the real loopy phase of things and just crawling through that last half there, and rely on those folks to help out during those later miles and keep us moving and sane and eating and all of that.
Yeah. Going back to the race estimator, it's definitely challenging to try and fill that out for something like this. Again, with all the unknowns, and you don't know what your pace is going to be past, roughly 100 miles. You're not quite sure where you're going to sleep. It'll really depend on conditions and that kind of stuff. I do stick by my guns though and say, like, it's worth going through the effort of attempting to fill that thing out because it forces you to walk through the game plan. So it forces you to think about not only your ideal situation, but also even worst case scenario, because you are dealing with a time frame and there are specific cutoffs at some of these aid stations because you've got 200 miles of course, you've got people spread out over the whole thing. They can't have everybody spanning that whole distance. It's a drain on resources. So there are hard cutoffs that if you don't make them, they will pull you from the course. Best case scenario, worst case scenario, and then likely something in between. And if you resist going through this exercise and being like, well, I don't, just the second you say, I don't know, it has this like effect on your brain that just switches it off. And you don't even try, not you specifically, but just humans in general. You don't even try to think about what are the possibilities. But if you are faced with this type of exercise and you're just like, okay, well, what if? Okay, let's just start with the best case scenario. I'm going to maintain this, everything's going to go perfectly. I'm going to maintain this pace. I'm going to sleep here. It's going to line up nicely with X, Y, and Z. And then I'm going to finish. This is great. Okay, great. That's tab number 1, best case scenario. Tab number 2, what's the worst case scenario? Like, I'm feeling, I get through the first, let's call it 40 miles, that first time that you guys thought you were going to sleep, everything's going great. And then I just tank. what's the last possible second and the slowest possible pace that I can maintain and still meet those cutoffs and still finish? And what does that look
Hmm.
like? Because, I think at some point we've all probably been chasing cutoffs, and I don't particularly love that feeling, but it does light a fire under your ass. And if you know what the wiggle room is that you have, it's much easier to make some of those on course decisions versus being like, well, you didn't go through the exercise at all. And you're like, I have no idea. So, like, you just get all up in your head and then you're all like frenzied. I got to get out of here. Oh no, I
Yeah.
can't sleep. And then it all of a sudden just turns into a nosedive. Your race takes a nosedive because you haven't had the opportunity to really think best case, worst case, what's the happy medium between the two.
Yeah. I think one thing that this type of training with the walk run intervals has helped me realize is that the consistency I feel when I do walk run intervals is much greater. So I just recently last week, did a 3 day, 8 hours a day. So I ended up with a 50K each day. And that's a little bit slower than I would do a 50K if I was exclusively running. But I did 100% walk run intervals by design. I wanted to do that on purpose. And I was very consistent in terms of like my ability to hold various paces. And granted, I have to admit, it was primarily on a treadmill because it's icy AF here right now. I did get a couple hours outside on the first 2 days, but I just had to use a treadmill for the majority of it, which was uh, challenging, but a good mental test as well. And I did wear my pack the whole time, so I was on my treadmill with my my Solomon and everything. I looked really cool. um, but I was consistent in both like the performance side of it in terms of what paces I was able to hold and how I felt. So I didn't feel at all worse on day 3 as compared to day 1. I felt just as consistent. And I got some creaky spots, and it's like kind of like I'm all set having been on a treadmill for like the last 22 hours or whatever. But I didn't feel I didn't feel wildly worn out. And that, I was like fatigued at the end of the day after 3. Of course I was tired, and I'm, really needed a good shakedown after that and stretch the joints out and all this, but I wasn't wrecked even remotely. I think that I need to keep that in mind so that when I'm at mile 40 and I have a panic, I just got to go. I just got to fly out of here. No, you don't. You need to, if you hold this consistent pace, it will pay dividends down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that a little bit this last year at Ghost Train. I ended up starting to walk at like mile 55, which was sooner than I had wanted. But I just felt so good walking, and I was holding a very, very strong walking pace. And granted, it did get slower, but I was walking so strong at the end of Ghost Train this year. And overall, my performance wasn't as good, but I did feel like, wow, because I started walking sooner, the walk was so strong. It's not like I drove myself to the point where I had to walk because I wasn't able to run, but I walked by design earlier, and I was walking past people who were running. I was walking faster than they were running. There was this one guy, we kept leapfrogging because aid stations and stuff, and I'd walk past, and as a joke, he's like, "What the hell? How are you doing that?" Like, I don't know, I just walk fast.
Yeah.
And I think that that will pay dividends at Southern States if I am careful to not panic and feel like, oh God, I gotta go out, I gotta get going, I gotta get going.
Mm-hmm.
The cutoffs, yes, there are cutoffs. They are very generous. Keep your nose to the grindstone. We will be okay. There aren't any cutoffs that are quite as stringent as some of the races out west. So as long as we are not, laying down at 40 miles for an 8 hour sleep, which we're not, we should be fine with cutoffs. And I think that taking it conservatively at the beginning will help me significantly in those
Mm-hmm.
later miles.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a dream the other day that we ran for 8 miles and then I took an 8 hour nap. I woke up and I was like, I don't think this is the sleep strategy that's going to have a great deal of success in Southern States. But it's like, oh, that's really got Southern States on the brain. It is very all consuming at this point in my life.
be the thing that you're doing right now, because you're right, it is all consuming. And I think like part of the work there is to do the mental side of things, which is to, do the planning, like we talked, filling out the race estimator, doing the planning, and like, you know, like making sure that all of those things are lined up so that you can, have like a little zen moment with yourself and like know that everything is fine and like walk yourself through it from start to finish and just be like, this is what I'm going to use here. This is what I'm going to use here. I've got options, and I think part of this too is like having crew in some way, shape, or form. And there are lots of people that do these 200 miles sans crew, which I am completely amazed at. But they also go through this exercise of drop bags and,
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
walking themselves through the race from start to finish and kind of visualizing when might I need this thing, what drop bag should it go in, and the whole 9 yards. And the more you do that, some people think, oh, it's just going to amp me up. It's going to make me more and more like worried. I operate under the premise that like the more I do it, and the more I do it in a calm, like centered Zen space, the more confident I will be because I will have done best case, worst case, middle of the road scenario, and I will be prepared for everything that happens.
Yeah, I think going through all of those, it makes me feel like I've considered all the possibilities for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So I have to ask, what are you most nervous, worried, afraid, scared about?
I think it's either the climbing because I do have the hiking experience, but it's not in the immediate past. Um, I know that with 57 people spread out over 200 miles, there will be times that whether it's Frank and Nicole and I, or if things end up where I am solo for part of it, the navigation is really critical. And the course obviously is marked, but things can go awry, things can get removed. I think that making sure I'm really on it with the navigation is, I'm not scared necessarily, but I just want to make sure I have my ducks in a row. And I have all the maps downloaded and all of that stuff. But this is it. I've never been to this trail before in my life, so it's not a familiar place at all. I think those are two things. I'm not really fussed about the night running. I love running at night. I love being out in that like little sphere of your bubble of light and just listening to the nature. I don't get freaked out about running at night. I really love it. So to me, that's not, I guess I should think about like what predators are down there, but I think we'll be okay. I don't think we're gonna get any mountain lions or anything. They like no alligators in that part of Georgia, so we should
Not up
be
in the
okay.
mountains, I don't think.
Yeah, I think we're good. If I start calling you guys, I saw a mountain alligator, you can know she really started hallucinating.
Yeah, I mean, the hallucinations will happen. It will just be a matter of when. But I also think, too, the sleep strategy really plays into that. Like, if you
Hmm.
dig too deep into that reservoir and like overdraw that sleep account, you're definitely going to get more than you bargained for in terms of the hallucinations. So, staying on top of sleep, and the even if it's like an infamous Courtney Dauwalter like 1 minute dirt nap, you'd be surprised how much it really does help to just sit down and lean yourself up against a tree and close your eyes for a few
Yeah,
minutes,
yeah.
because it is a you your whole system. I'm trying to like in my mind think of like a good way to describe this, and the only way I can like I'm literally going back to that point when I was like, I just saw this big, huge tree, and I just sat down next to it and leaned up against it on the side of the trail. And I was just like, I felt like my whole nervous system was just sort of like frazzled, like
Hmm.
fried. You're just on all the time. You're dealing with, the movement and the nutrition and the sleep deprivation and, all the things. And you just at some point, I mean, you will at some point say to yourself or to all of us, like, I'm ready to just be done moving. Like, I'd like to just
Hmm.
sit still for like a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And to do that, even in small increments, can be really helpful. Closing your eyes and just like taking a couple deep breaths and knowing that, this isn't going to keep you from finishing. This is just like a quick dirt nap or a quick break where we just like, again, like center your chi and like get yourself back in the zone can be really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. I guess I can put sleep on the thing I'm most nervous about too, is I've done a two-nighter, but it's not the same, it's not the same type of trail. It's different, it's a two-nighter and then you're done. This is not that. So that's definitely going on the unknown, maybe a little scared of list for sure, the sleep stuff.
And
And
I
I
think,
think because you just can't really simulate it unless you do it. I think that's why it's scary. I don't know. I can know what it feels like to run X number of miles or move, X number of hours. I can know what it feels like to do that and then wake up and do it again and then wake up and do it again. Granted, the overall mileage is lower than what I'll do, but like I can simulate that. I can like dip my toe into it. And it just feels, I think it did help a lot to do the two-nighter, the 48-hour at Notch View. Um, I'm really glad I did that and it will serve me well, but there's just elements of the sleep deprivation that you just really can't simulate effectively. Um, and I know that some people manage it really well, and some people super go off the chain, off the track. So we will see. We'll see where I land
yeah.
on that.
And
But
I
I agree,
think,
like what you said about like if you dig yourself such a deep hole that you're wildly hallucinating. I don't want to get to that point. I don't want to be alone in the woods wildly hallucinating. That is definitely not the goal. I want to manage myself to prevent that for
yeah.
sure.
One of the things that we all talked about, so you, me, Frank, Marty, Jocelyn, Nicole, we all got on Kim too, we all got on our like crew pacer, call the other day to just sort of hash things out. And we talked a little bit about, the game plan, the goal of you three sticking together for, as much as possible. But, if you have to part ways and yada, yada, yada. And you mentioned here how, Frank's preference is for someone to be with him at night. Your preference is to kind of reserve, have your pacers in your back pocket and, deploy them maybe a little bit later. And I remember, again, we had the conversation about there being, okay, this is great, but with that asterisk, right? Like we have to, you know, um, have a plan, but be willing to roll with the punches as they come. And one of those things is trusting your crew and your pacers to help make some decisions for you if you become, I'm not going to say incapacitated, but like if you are no longer making really smart
Yeah, sort of
decisions for
like
yourself.
emotionally incapacitated, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, when the sleep deprivation kicks
Yeah,
in, when you start getting tired and frustrated, when you're over it, when you're at that low point, whatever it might be, whether it's like in the middle of the night or, as whatever, really trusting your crew to help. And even if you might want to use your pacers later in the game, there may come a time where we supersede or override that decision and throw one of us into the mix to just get you to the next point. And I think that's a big part of being someone's crew, being someone's pacer, like having a really good idea of what their plan is. Literally, as I was just like, as I was thinking about this, I'm like, not that I've ever done this because I am not the expert, but like having a birthing plan. Right? Like you go into it like having a birthing plan and like it being a very, bing bam boom, like these are the things I want to do. And then sometimes you get to go by that plan and sometimes it is just not,
yeah.
that is not in the cards. And so I feel like this is the
Done
same
that.
thing.
And there was sort of a plan, and that's not what happened, but
Yeah.
it all worked out in the end. So
See? That's
yeah,
the thing. And that's the
it
thing. And
didn't
that's
take as long as what Southern states will take. So that is something I will say. I had planned for a more endurance-based event, and that's not what happened. I was almost the lady that gave birth in parking lot, but it's all good.
okay, that's
Worked
maybe
out.
we tell that story the next time, but like that's a very
Yeah.
interesting one. But that's I think it's the same concept, right? Like, you have a plan, you've involved all these other people, right? In the birth plan, doctors, nurses, supporting people, right? And here it's your crew, your pacers, and we're working together, but also at some point we may override and start to like help you A, stay on track, B, force you to sleep or at least lay down, and then we might speed you up. We might slow you down, if you're just
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
hot to trot. And I think that's another one too. Is like, if you're going too fast, we don't want you to flame out. So there's a little bit of this like strategy here, and it's going to take, which I find this is like my happy place. Like I like this a lot. So this is like fun for me to get to go through this with
Being
you.
in the runner position or the crew and pacer position?
Well, crew and pacer, I
Okay,
definitely
great.
I enjoyed my Tahoe time, and I know that I will enjoy my Moab time too. It is, I mean, again, it is challenging physically, mentally, emotionally as a runner. And so it's really great when you can have a support crew that gets it, that knows what your objectives are, that is, and it's not easy. I mean, we've talked about um what it's like to crew and pace, and how it's, a full-time job, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's like your schedule isn't, 9 to 5, it's whatever your runner's schedule is. So you're
Mhm.
sleeping in the back of the van, you're, eating as best you can, right? You've got your gear at the ready, you're planning, you're trying to meet your runner at the aid station, but if their tracker doesn't work, or, like you have to kind of go with the flow. I mean, we didn't even talk about how that's a possibility that we might, miss you at some point. Not that I want to seed that idea, but like, it's a roll of the dice, right? Like if the something could happen, right? But I do think that this is part of the fun, to be able to strategize and, really put forth a solid team effort, because it is going to take all of us. It's going to take me and Marty and Jocelyn and Kim, and, it's going
Yeah,
to be
for
fun.
sure.
It's going to
And
be
we
a good
did
time.
get some good practice with that. And I didn't really feel like we needed to go there necessarily at Ghost Train, but at Notch View, there were times that, especially because the heat really kicked in, and that can cause chafing in areas that maybe you didn't experience before. And there were a few times that Frank was like looking at my arm, and he's like, "All right, we're taping that." Oh, okay, boss. Like giving up control,
Hmm.
or like put your feet up and take your socks off for the next 5 minutes. And Marty will be really thrilled to look at your gnarly heat stroke rash, disgusting feet. He's in his element. So
Yep.
luckily Marty is on board to do foot care. Um, but it was good practice to sort of just like give up control and let other people make decisions for you, and to know that we have a crew that I can trust to do these things so effectively, and all have the same goal is so wonderful. So I'm so appreciative to our awesome crew.
If you were going to say something to the Sarah that has like finished the race, what would it be?
Ooh,
I sprung this one on you. I did not
I
tell you I
know
was
I
going to ask
didn't.
you this ahead of time.
It was all worth it. That's what I'd
Yeah.
say. It was all worth it. And I think for me, one of the things that's wonderful and joyful about ultra running is I'm so excited for the event. I'm so excited for like the big day and the big event and all of this, but all of the stuff that I've done to prepare for it wasn't just for that event. The stuff that I've done to prepare for it was for that too. I just did a 50K on a treadmill, and like that was great. Like I don't regret, like if Southern States got canceled, I wouldn't be mad that I did all that work. It wouldn't be like quote for nothing. The process to me is as enjoyable as what the event will be. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
just, if the event goes such that I'm able to finish, it'll be worth it. It'll be worth it either way. But yeah, it's all worth it.
I love it. That's so good. And I agree. I think that people who have the most success on any level, success and enjoyment, are the ones that really get invested in the process. And it's not, I'm doing all of this training for this one thing. It's like there's so many benefits that happen throughout the days and weeks and months that you train, that it should be really worth it for you to invest that time and energy. And even if, the race gets canceled, or you DNF, or whatever it is, that time is not lost. That time is not worthless. That training isn't for nothing. If nothing else, you have learned a shit ton about yourself, your capacity, your limits, your perceived limits, your mental state, like how equipped mentally are you to tackle, some of these longer distances. And I think the emphasis. Like if you miss that, you're missing a big key lesson that ultra training has to teach you.
Yeah. And if you don't enjoy the process, I don't know if a 200 is the place to start because there's a
No.
lot of process in this training for a 200.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine signing myself up for this if I didn't have fun with all of these, putting all of these pieces together.
Mhm. Yeah, I would definitely, I support that wholeheartedly. Like if you don't love the process, maybe 50K is for you, right? Or maybe even 50 miles, but definitely not 100 or 200 because you really have to enjoy walking, running, strength training, stretching, mobility, you know, resting and doing the recovery things, doing all the things that are going to pay off long term. It's funny, we can end on this note, but like I was talking to Shannon earlier today, Shannon from our coaching group about the topic of like time management and scheduling and stuff like that has come up a lot amongst group members, and it's an ongoing conversation that lots of you guys are having both in the group and outside of the group. And the conversation was sort of like, well, I'm not getting the things done that I know I need to do, and I'm struggling to get those things done. And how like what's the secret sauce? Like, what is the thing that gets you to do that? And kind of what we were talking about was like the very, very, very delayed gratification that is this sport. So, we talk about it all the time when we talk about the shakedown or when we talk about mobility or walking, all of the components really. And it's not that you are going to see the benefit or reap any sort of benefits, maybe other than, that like runner's high or really enjoying a workout today, but your benefits, your payout are, 60, 90, 120 days from now. And it's just this repeated pennies in the bank, compounding over time. And so, if you're struggling with, getting the work done versus, you know, um, needing to be chained, our conversation was sort of like around being chained to the desk all day and having
Hmm.
some,
Hmm.
guilt around like training when you quote unquote should be working. And, a lot of the stuff that a lot of us go through in terms of, work and family and all that kind of stuff. And it's more about thinking to that end, going to the end, and visualizing yourself on the starting line of whatever race it is, and looking back at your current self and saying, future self, current self, are you happy with the decisions that you
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
in that moment so that you can get to do that thing? And then when Shannon asked me like, well, how do you make those, and I said, this is how I make those decisions, because I want to be able to show up on race day knowing that I've literally done everything in my power to be prepared for this, and if something happens, so be it, but it won't be because I flaked on this, that, or the other, or we all do bargaining, we all bargain with ourselves about like how much time, how much mileage, and that's fine, that's part of the process. And I think you have to participate in that bargaining during the training so that you learn how to not bargain with yourself
Yeah.
in the race, because you
Yeah.
can never be sure how that's all going to pan out, right? And if if you bargain, if your threshold for bargaining is really low during your training, then it's going to be really low in your race, and that is not a recipe for success.
I like that
So,
phrase, your threshold for bargaining. I might have to
mhm.
write that one down. I think you make a good point about like the balance of things and how, we all have these different things that are pulling at us and we have to make some sort of strategic decisions about what you say yes to and what you say no to. And I knew especially in the last couple of weeks that like I'm really getting to that point in training where it's just so time consuming because I'm having fantasies about things that are just objectively not fun. And I'm like, oh, if I could just have like a whole Saturday to like mop my house or like clean my bathroom, like things that like I don't want to do that, but I'm having fantasies of like if I could just skip my run and just like do laundry, like there. My house isn't the cleanest it's ever been. I'm making some strategic choices in where I'm spending my time, but I am so excited for this experience, and there is a part of me that is so excited for being on the other side of it too, and taking a deep breath and looking at what's next. And I really would like to put an outcome goal out there that when Southern States is over, I am going to spend a weekend just on my couch, and I'm not going to run, and I'm going to just watch movies and snuggle my dogs for like at least 48 straight hours. And I will aid station myself candy and ice cream throughout. But I look forward to that as much as I look forward to the that finish line at Southern States.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little more excited about Southern States, but
Yeah. And I think that's like, that is the epitome of an argument for an off season, right? Because that is a unsustainable way of
yeah,
living year
yeah,
round. If you're constantly like, I would really like to, clean my bathroom or really like to do that to me, and I've definitely been there too. And you might go through that a couple times through your training cycle. But if, you're finding yourself that way all the time, then probably want to bake in a little bit more downtime, a little bit more off season somewhere into the mix so that you're excited to be done and then you're excited to start over again,
yeah, yeah.
like there's that cyclicality to it.
Peaks and valleys. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am pumped. I am very excited about this. You and me and Nicole have the same flight down
Yes.
to Georgia. So
Are we gonna
just
wear our SRU shirts and we can twin on the airplane, hopefully?
absolutely, absolutely,
What else? What other
absolutely.
sweatshirt exists on the
Yeah.
planet? None. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to have there'll be lots of good voice memos and video and all sorts of stuff. So this will probably be like a three-parter. There will be this one, there will be like the behind the scenes, voice memos, crewing, pacing, shenanigans, and then the follow-up, the post-race.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am also excited for the shenanigans. I think that will be a really big part of this. If our WhatsApp thread is any indication, there will be some very excellent shenanigans going down. Watch out, Georgia and Alabama. We are coming. Oh boy,
Yeah, I mean, they
must
got
be.
the memo. We were talking Southern States 200, so they
Yep,
were very, very excited. Yeah. Yeah.
totally.
Thank you, my friend. I can't wait to go through this experience with you and
Me too.
document it along the way, whatever the outcome, whatever the shenanigans might be. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too.
Yay.